When I was a young man, 3 pictures hung in the home of my devoutly Catholic immigrant grandparents, and I remember them very well. Jesus, Pope Paul VI, and John F. Kennedy. The president was to Catholic families a great source of pride and a symbol that all barriers had finally been broken. What my family and maybe even candidate Kennedy at the time didn't realize was that in a key moment in that election of 1960, right here in Houston, then candidate Kennedy began the construction of another, even more threatening wall for our society, one that sealed off informal moral wisdom into a realm of non-rational beliefs that have no legitimate role in public discourse. 50 years ago this Sunday, JFK delivered a speech to the Greater Houston Ministerial Association to dispel suspicions about the role the papacy might play in the government of this country under his administration. Let's make no mistake about it. President Kennedy was addressing a real issue at the time. Prejudice against Catholics threatened to cost him in the election. But on that day, John F. Kennedy chose not to just dispel fear. He chose to expel faith. Let me quote from the beginning of Kennedy's speech. "I believe in America where the separation of church and state is absolute." The idea of strict or absolute separation of church and state is not and never was the American model. It's a model that's used in countries like France and until recently Turkey, but it found little support here in America until it was introduced into the public discourse by Justice Hugo Black in the case of Everson versus the Board of Education in 1947. Justice Black, by the way, was a Catholic-hating former member of the KKK, who ironically enough advocated this strict separation doctrine to keep public funds from Catholic schools. While the phrase separation of church and state doesn't appear in the Constitution, the concept of keeping the government apart from religion does. The first part of the First Amendment prohibits the federal government from establishing a state church, such as existed in England and in some of the states in 1791, and from discriminating for or against particular faiths. The founders were determined to ensure that the new national government had no jurisdiction over matters of religion, in large part to ensure that each American would be free to pursue the religion of their choice without state interference. Far from reflecting hostility toward religion, our founders, rooted in their own faith convictions, knew that faith was not just an essential element, but the essence of civilization and the inspiration of culture. The second reference to religion in the First Amendment guaranteed the free exercise of religion, and in conjunction with the prohibition on established churches, these two concepts were to work together to ensure that religion and people of faith had powerful constitutional protections of their right not only to worship as their conscience dictated, but to be free to bring their religiously informed moral convictions into the public discourse. The phrase wall of separation, used by Black, comes from a letter written by a founder who didn't even attend the Constitutional Convention, Thomas Jefferson. After he was elected president, he mentioned the phrase in a response to a letter written to him by the Danbury Baptists. The Baptists had expressed concern to him about the right of the government to interfere with the religious pursuits of the people, not the rights of the people to engage their government with religiously informed moral judgments. Jefferson's wall of separation was describing how the First Amendment was designed to protect churches from the government and nothing more. Note that the Sunday following the day that he wrote that letter, he wrote it on a Friday, Jefferson attended religious services in the Capitol building. So much for the founders' hostility or indifference to religion. But Kennedy's misuse of the phrase constructed a high barrier that ultimately would keep religious convictions out of politics in a place where our founders had intended just the opposite.